Welcome to another episode of Metal Mastermind. That was kind of a weak death metal growl there. Sorry, guys. Co-founder and co-host here, Jason Stallworth, and co-founder and co-host also, the great
Ken Candelas.
What's up, dude?
This is great. I'm so excited about this episode today because I think when we are talking about stuff like your legends and, how do people become on the status of legendary or mythical, I think it's a very, almost like, I don't know, it's elusive things. I feel like people don't look at legends as people necessarily.
Yeah, it's a great topic, and guys, that's what we're talking about today. How do you become a legend? Do you even want to? But how do we define that? Now, Ken, we are gonna share with folks how to become your own legend in your own life. So that's the important part, because you may look at the title like, well, I don't care about being a legend. That's not my thing or whatever. But I think in your own life, there's a way that I believe we all should become that legend. We should strive to that. We'll talk more about what I mean by that. And we're going to get into how to adapt to change. It kind of rolls right into that because change is inevitable. That's really one of the core constants in life is change, and how to adapt to those changes to become the best version of yourself. So, Ken, legends, dude. So before we get into what defines legends, like what's one of your great legends? Like legendary, is it musicians, actor? Like who would that be, dude?
Dante Alighieri.
Ooh,
Dante Alighieri. He's the author of Dante's Inferno. Jay, I'm writing an entire album and story and world that's based upon the afterlife, and it's heavily inspired by Dante. So yeah, talk about legendary. This guy has a story that's been going for more than, like 1,000 years. So,
oh, dude, yeah.
That's kind of insane, when you think about it. These old ancient stories, Homer, of course, because that's where the name Homeric comes from. I love old stories. I think there's just a universal attractiveness to them that draws everybody closer to each other, to learn more about humanity and what does it mean to be a good person. And I think those types of qualities out of things that are intangible, like a story, because it's an elusive thing, it's an idea. I think those are very important, and that's why I think we give so much credence to music, because music is kind of like a way of decorating time, so to speak, because you have this ability to associate, either memories or personal experiences or anything with a moment in time when you heard a song. A song can take you back to when you were a child and you had a memory with that. Just like, if you smelled something, right? I think our sensory senses are very keen on memory. And, what makes a memory are the things that, you spend time with your family, you create those memories, and you enjoy the things that blossom within those memories, like music and art and all these, maybe you go to a festival and you have a good time with your kids. Those types of things are important, and you become a legend in your own kids' eyes, right? For doing that. I think those are super important to consider, and being a legend is not always just the biggest and the baddest. It's also the things that matter to you too, right?
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that, Ken. Like to someone who doesn't know anything about Dante, and I honestly I know very little. I know of Dante, this whole world, but of course you've dug deep into this. This is one of your passions. You've made a whole project based on it. But what would you say makes this person legendary to someone who has no clue who Dante is?
Okay, well, so Dante, just to put it very simply, is the reason why we have any sort of imagery of hell and the inferno. Yeah, it's cool now, but back then, the church was using Dante as a way to control the populace by scaring them into showing them what hell looks like. So, and I don't think Dante necessarily intended for that to be the case. I think he wrote his story, and people just used it as they would. So Dante became a legend inadvertently because he was dealing with political bureaucracy, and the Inferno was his escape from all of that. I mean, he put people in hell that he didn't like, and he published it, quite literally. So people were very mad at Dante. Dante was actually someone who was under house arrest for quite a while, because they wanted to have him influence people, and he was influencing people with his works. So it's interesting to me, the repercussions of Dante's actions, and how through time we've used Dante's stories as a way to guide people on what is good and what is bad, and the moral stance of a human. So yeah, I mean, for someone who hasn't read or anybody who hasn't interacted with anything by Dante Alighieri, Alighieri really became the definitive person in Western literature from Italy. He was the Italian great poet that inspired so many concepts of the underworld. So he's very important, and that's one of the biggest reasons why.
I mean, this is a great example too of someone who may have not intended to become a legend or be famous or any of that, but someone that just had a deep passion for what they did. We can relate that to really all of us, all of you listening right now. I think when you're passionate about something that you're doing, maybe you don't have the intent on becoming legendary. Maybe you don't even care about that. You don't care about the fame. Some people do. I think a lot of people, even though they won't admit it, they kind of do. They want to be known. Listen, guys, I'll tell you, I don't need to be famous per se, but let me tell you how good it feels to me when I walk into a store or when I'm seen somewhere and somebody recognizes me from my music or from my YouTube channel. And albeit I'm a small character in the world, right? I'm a very tiny fish in a huge sea or many seas, but it does feel good to be recognized for what I do. That feels really awesome. It makes me feel like, a celebrity or something sometimes when people come up and say how much my videos helped them, or they saw one of my videos and heard my music or whatever. So, but Dante, I don't think maybe he didn't intend to become famous, but because he's so passionate, or he was so passionate about what he was doing, that just kind of, brewed a life of its own.
Yeah, I mean, and Dante was inspired by Homer and Virgil and other ancient storytellers who, by the way, by Dante's time, they were already more than 1,000 years old.
Wow, dude. Wow.
You're talking about the ancient Greeks at this point. So yeah, I mean, there are certain legends that carry an echo through time, and Dante was just another ripple in that. And those ripples, they grow far and wide from the source, right? You make a big splash where you start, and then those ripples, they carry out, right? That energy still flows like on a lake, across a river, wherever. And that's going to that's like the analogy of just time and how it affects people down the line. People still feel the ripple effects from Dante, or still feel the ripple effects from Homer, for that matter. That's super important to recognize. And I think, I mean, you have certain moments in history where a lot of things like knowledge was either burned or it was banned. And, you had, going either to like the Nazi regime where they were burning books, or you go to the library of Alexandria where they burned down the entire library, the Romans. Right. That time period for the Christians who wanted to, disavow anything that wasn't God related, or, taking away all of the, study of different types of religions, because they thought they were the only religion that mattered. So it's just kind of interesting to see how all of these things really influence each other, and how I'm influenced by Dante, and Dante's influenced by Homer, and I'm influenced by Homer through Dante, and all of these connections that we have, this web of history. It's just striking to me, and it's beautiful.
That's cool, man. That is cool, dude. One of my legendary characters in life. I've got a couple, not too many, but Joe Satriani. Obviously, he's one of my legendary people.
Love
I consider.
Satriani.
Well, yeah, the reason I consider him a legend is because, and this is subjective, but I think his guitar playing is phenomenal. I think a lot of people do, but it's not for everyone. I get that. We all have different tastes, but and again, this is very subjective, but I believe he's one of the few that can truly replace where the vocals are with his guitar. And I love the way he presents that. And he's very, very much very creative, right? In that sense that he can come up with these really, like, some of the melodies are so simple, Ken. Some of the melodies are just, and you listen, it's like, okay, well, this isn't like overly complicated, but it goes to show you that it doesn't have to be. He can take something simple and still make it into something very creative and beautiful. He can do the technical stuff. He can shred and all that stuff, and he does from time to time. I think a little less these days than he did in his earlier days. But he's a legend in my eyes because he's just so creative, and his music to me is so captivating. Now, let me move on to one more. Actually, I got two more. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, both icons, both legends to me. But I'll touch briefly on Arnold. I've read several books. I've got his book, My Unbelievable True Life Story, and I just watched his recent documentary. But I'm very well versed in Arnold's life, or at least what he's put out there for us to read and listen to. He came from nothing, from Austria. He didn't have the luxury of growing up in a place like America. And I know we have our problems here like anywhere, but we don't have near as many problems as some other countries have. And during the time Arnold was growing up in Austria during the Nazi regime, well, that had to have been an extra difficult time, but he made his way over here. He still pursued bodybuilding. He loved it. What I love about Arnold, though, like he's been successful just about everything in bodybuilding and acting and investing. He had his own, like, book order business at one point with those programs and such. And, of course, politics. There's so many things the man has done with his life. But in any case, though, he came over here with nothing, but he will tell you that I'm not a self-made man. I'm not a self-made person like some people will believe. He admits that if it weren't for Joe Weider, who was the popular icon in bodybuilding at that time, he was like, the father of bodybuilding. If it weren't for Joe Weider seeing that special thing in him and bringing him over and giving him that chance, right, he may have never been, he may have never become what he had became. But he took that chance and he just went all in, man. I heard him talking about how he would visualize what he wanted. He would visualize it, right? And it's like, okay, well, that mountain is way over there, but I just got to make a path to get there. And he just did it. It's kind of what we talked about on our last podcast. When things are important to you, like if your music's that important to you, if being a musician, whether it's full time or starting a band, whatever it is, if that's your goal and if you want it bad enough, you will have to find that way. But I'll back up. I won't say you find the way. What I will say is that you have to create that way. Guys, that is very important. I'll say it again. Don't find a way, create a way. That's what you need to do. Okay. Look at life as you're creating the way. It's not there. Oftentimes it's not there. You can follow the success path of someone else to the T and still not get anywhere near their results. That's because things change. And we're going to talk about adapting to change in a few minutes here, but things change, right? The world changes. And everything, every situation, every circumstance is individualized. Everything is unique. So you have to create your own path. You can learn from people. I hope that you guys learn from Ken and I. You learn from us. You learn from Metal Mastermind. You can take bits and pieces from others. I try to read a couple books a month. Sometimes I don't make it that far, but like a book, you might not use every single word of that book. That might not apply to you. Actually, probably maybe only 20% of the book applies to you, maybe even 10%, but there might be that 1, 2, or 3 golden nuggets that you get out of that 300-page book that will change your life, that will help you change your life, that will help you create that path. It's like, okay, I read this book, but these two things I learned, wow, they speak to me. I'm going to implement these in my own way, and I'm going to create my own path.
Yeah. Perspective is super important. It's how you tackle the world. It's the attitude you go in every day and, make things happen for whatever it is that's going to happen that day. I mean, you need to really consider that your life is all of the choices that you made, and all of the emotions that you're feeling right now is a result of how you've decided to go about your life, right? And sometimes that's not always the easiest thing to hear, because everybody may be in a situation where they felt like they weren't necessarily in control of that. But I think really what I'm trying to say is that there are so many things that happen that lead to another. And again, this comes back to, why did Homer influence Dante? I mean, there was a sequence of events that Homer had to do, and then people passed that information along to finally Dante, finally to someone like me who's doing my own thing. And all of this is here, and I don't control anything about Dante, but I am encapsulated by his influence. And what I do around my time is all based upon that as a foundation. So if Dante never existed, obviously, I would have never probably done the story that I'm making right now. It's that important to kind of think how wide everything is connected to each other, even throughout time. So it's fascinating. And when you are in the mindset of not just being so of a victim of circumstance, life is more beautiful that way, where you can really shape it as you want to. And I firmly believe that you can. Yes, life does happen, because I think just like Dante and Homer influencing me just happened, there are certain things that you do have control over that are on your sort of layer of influence. And I think this is an important kind of concept, and how big our layer or circle of influence becomes based upon what we do. And that influence grows. When I became a teacher, my influence grew like tenfold from what I was doing before. Doing Middle Mastermind does that even more for me. And I think when you're talking about people that have a lot of influence, like a Satriani or a John Petrucci or something like that, those guys, their circle of influence has grown considerably larger than a majority of people. And their light shines bright, it's a beacon, and it becomes a reference for people. And so I think when you're talking about becoming a legend, I think the legend becomes the reference. It's what people aspire to be. It is the foundation for all other influential circles. That's what I think being a legend is. It's your to put it in the way of James Bond, you're kind of like the man's man. It's it's tremendous.
Well, we've heard that, and I can't remember who we heard this from. You and I both, maybe it was from Leah McHenry or CJ, the Metal Motivator, but, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Now,
Yeah.
we are standing on those shoulders if we choose to stand on them. We talked about this in just the last podcast we had on making the decision to either do the blame game and play the victim in life and woe is me, versus doing what you need to do no matter what to make it. We just talked about having control over your life. So I believe that we have complete control over everything in our lives. Now, I say that with a caveat of even the things that happen in life that you can't control. Like if you live in a storm area, you can't control that storm, that hurricane or tornado. That's just one example. I live in Florida. There are a lot of sinkholes here. I mean, God forbid that ever happened, but there's no way I can control that. However, I can control how I react to those things. Somebody just cut you off in traffic, right? Well, you had you had no control over that person being an idiot and cutting you off in traffic. However, you do have complete control over whether or not you decide to get upset at that person and carry that anger for the next hour, 6 hours, and even over into the next day, or if you just nip it right there and it's like, you know what? Okay, I'm glad an accident didn't result because of what that person just did. I'm going to go about my day now. You control that. You control how you react to that, right? So I think that's part of what makes these people legends is how they chose to react to things that happened in their life. Dante, in your case, Ken, obviously didn't have it easy. A lot was going against them. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he had his fair share of challenges. I mean, he's going for Mr. Olympia. You know, he's got a lot of people going up against him, right? Getting into
Right.
the acting world with the weird accent. Both him and Sylvester Stallone, you know, had some voice issues, whether it was the accent or the slurring or whatever, right? They both had challenges, disadvantages, right? Which could have turned into reasons why, well, I'm never going to be an actor. I've got this disadvantage. Well, instead of doing that, they reacted a different way, or they chose to act a different way. It's like, you know what? I'm going to go for it anyway. This is my dream. This is what I'm doing with my life. So I think that mentality is part of how, you know, you can be a legend. And even if you're not somebody famous per se, I believe you can still be your own legend in your own life.
It to me, it kind of comes down to what do people remember about you, and it's not about the things that you had or the money that you had or anything like that. It's always been like, you know, what memories did you create for people? And when you start to expand your that influence that I'm talking about, you start touching the lives of others without directly being there in front of them. That's your circle of influence becoming, you know, your reputation, your notoriety. And legends, they have that. They have a notoriety. They have a giant name that people look up to. Again, like I mentioned, this concept of being a reference for people. That's what legends provide. You know, that's why they're an icon, and that's why you know, you grow up and you listen to people like, you know, James Hetfield, and you are enormously inspired by them and their tone, and you try to seek to get the same thing, and because you haven't found your voice yet, you know, and that's part of the process. Nobody knows if they're going to be a legend or not, you know, from the get-go. That's just not something that is told to you. It's kind of funny to think that, you know, in certain periods of time, you know, people used to think that way, right? Like the Puritans, right? For example, they were deterministic. They thought that, you know, people were already chosen to go to heaven in certain ways. And, you know, they were living a life, whether or not knowing or not, that they were chosen to go to heaven. So some of them would have been, you know, doing everything right by the book, but, oh, you know, you just weren't in the books to go to heaven. So you're not going to go, you know, it's like, kind of insane how people have attributed like this concept of determinism. I don't believe entirely in the things like law of attraction necessarily. I do believe in certain concepts and how they pan out because of the actions that we do take. I do think that our actions are the things that actually create and pave the road. You know, your ideas are one thing, but the tangible result of that is your actions and what you do to actually make things, you know, better for others and move your life forward. So, you know, those kinds of, you know, like wishful thinkings of, oh, you know, I want my life to be this way. And you've mentioned people in the past about having visionaries, vision boards, or, you know, just having constant visions of what they imagine their life to be. But that doesn't happen just by, you know, them just wishing for it. They actually they cemented that in their strategy to make it happen, even if they didn't know what necessarily was the next move for that. They're either going on their gut, you know, they're going on intuition. Those kinds of things are our guiding forces that, when you say trust your gut, there's a reason for it, because that's the thing that's your conscience, right? It's your inner Jiminy Cricket. I just watched Pinocchio not too long ago, so
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Jiminy Cricket here, but you get the point.
I always loved the name Jiminy Cricket. I always thought it was just a cool name to have for a character. But I get you on the law of attraction. I know there's some concepts and beliefs and philosophies out there. I believe, I guess, more along the lines that on like a cause and effect. If you act a certain way, you are going to attract certain things into your life, right? Or you're going to push away certain things and even certain people in your life. So I believe in it in that sense. And when we're talking about legends, I do believe that their mindset, first of all, and the actions they took and the chances, more so than the action. Well, this is an action, right? But the risk that they took, like you said, Ken, they probably didn't know what every step was along the way. And that's where we get hung up a lot of times. We don't know all the steps we need to take, so we just freeze and don't do anything. And we'll sit there and study and read and watch videos and like, well, I got to have everything in place before I get started. I'm going to say, no, you don't. You just get started. You will figure things out along the way. We've said this many times before. Figure it out along the way, because if you wait until you have all the information that you need to get started, you will never get started. And by that time, it will be too late. And if you don't have enough raw determination to just make that move, to take that risk, if you want to call it a leap of faith, call it that, believing in yourself, it's like, you know what? I'm going to take this step. I'm uncomfortable. It's unknown territory, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I believe things will work out for you, right? I don't think that this means everything's going to be a bed of roses. It's a cool Bon Jovi song, by the way. Kind of slow, but anyway. Doesn't mean everything's going to work out the way you want it to. But I am a firm believer that if you have pure intentions and you go for it, I believe eventually you force the universe to work in your favor. I strongly believe that. I think people give up way too soon. They say, well, it's just not working. You don't know what's around the corner. And I think if you keep pushing yourself, and your goal may not be to become a legend, right? But I think inadvertently you become one, kind of like Dante inadvertently became one, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, I kind of have a feeling, well, he wanted to be a legend, but his goal wasn't to be a legend. His goal was to be the top bodybuilder, right? That was his first goal. He didn't really, I don't think he cared about like, well, I'm going to be a legend. Everybody's going to remember me, and all this stuff's going to happen years later. That was his goal, to step on the Olympia stage and take home that title. He did that multiple times. Once he completed that goal, and this is what I love about Arnold so much, is that he had another goal after that. It's like, okay, I did this. I've conquered bodybuilding, and I think in the midst of that, he started getting into investments and that sort of thing, buying apartment buildings and such, right? Building his portfolio. But, a wise thing for someone with money. But then after that, it's like, well, I want to step on stage. I want to act. So he started getting into that, and once he got so far into that, well, I've conquered that. What's next? And I think politics became next and so forth. But, I think that you just have to be willing to put in the work and believe in yourself and take that step forward, take the risk, because you know what? There's an even greater risk, or at least just as great of a risk, in not taking that step, right? There's a risk either way. So which consequence do you want, right? Which potential consequence do you want? Do you want to be 80, 90 years old looking back and like, man, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have taken that chance now. Well, guess what? It's probably too late at that point, right? So I think that's what makes a legend, is they're willing to take those chances and not look back and really have that confidence, even when you don't have confidence, because there are plenty of times I don't have confidence, but I just go do it anyway, And I think you just have to have that mentality, man. You can just push through, and you can, whether you become famous or not, I don't know how relevant that is, but you can become a legend in your own life. And what I mean by that, Ken, and everyone listening, is that you got to understand that even if you're not famous, you're impacting someone, guys. Every move that you make, everything that you do, it matters, because you're having an impact on someone. If you're doing great things with your life, or at least attempting to, you are having an influence on someone. Someone is looking at you, and that can mean that can mean the world to someone else, to see you doing something and to be impacted by you and to be influenced by you, that it changes their life for the better. And I believe when these things trickle down like that, it makes the world a little bit better of a place.
Yeah. Wise words, man. You're dead on with that. And I think legends are ways for us to remind ourselves that life is not something that is always creating situations for us. It's also situations that we can create for ourselves and control our lives in the ways that we seek. You know, you may not necessarily go to the degree of Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you know, Arnold's, his determinism may inspire you to continue to finish what you started, you know, in the smallest of ways. You know, maybe it's like you felt more badass today because you thought about the Terminator, and it gave you that extra boost of confidence because you wore a jacket that maybe reminded you of Arnold and his scenes, you know, or something like that. You know,
Sure,
like
sure.
I love the idea that, you know, legends and legendary people are ways of looking at life through hope. And that's why I always I said in the beginning of this podcast how we sometimes don't look at legends as people. You know, they're these like figures. They're like almost things that they're ideals. They're more than just people. And so when you meet somebody who is so influential, I mean, that's why people get starstruck, right? Because they're just like, oh my gosh, like this guy's an actual person, like a real life thing that I can physically touch. I had the pleasure when I was on Good Morning America to meet a lot of these kinds of people. And, you know, you quickly realize that they're just like you. They really are. Some of them are a little bit more, you know, in a bubble with certain things, but
Sure, sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's just kind of to be expected when you're at a level like that, right? When you become so influential, there it's hard to be grounded to the reality of others because things are just not normal for you.
Right, right.
So
Your world's
yeah,
different. Yeah.
your world is definitely different. And you know, that's why I think it's important to remember your roots. And that's why people say them, you know, like know where you come from, remember who helped you along the way, uplift those who are you know, coming after you, and you know, give them the opportunities that you had, or you know, those types of goodwill measures where that's one of the reasons why I love teaching. It becomes something that is holistic and worldly, and it has a sense of community that is bigger than me. You know, I'm not a legend per se like an Arnold, but you know what? In my domain, it's good enough for the amount of influence that I can impart on my students. And that is what's important. It's am I spreading the message that I want to spread? Um, you know, and you see over time how that grows. And when you influence people, people remember, they have those memories. And I remember one of my students, he was like, oh, oh, you're one of those kinds of teachers. I said, what do you mean those kind of teachers? And he goes like, you're the ones that people remember. I was like, wow, I appreciate that, man. That
That's
was
an
very,
awesome thing to
very
hear,
kind.
man.
It was
Yeah,
very,
that's
very
great.
kind. And so yeah, it's that's how you know you're on the right path. When people do remember you for the good things in life, you want to just keep doing that. You
And
know?
yeah, and that brings us to being adaptable to change. I remember when I was in my corporate job, this is, you know, over 3 years ago, but one of the leaders who I was under her organization at one time, you know, she was talking about
Sure.
success, and she said the two things that will make you successful in her eyes. was being adaptable to change. And secondly, just what you said, Ken, being memorable, being that type of person, that type of influence that someone is going to remember. Maybe it's not the masses, but maybe it's just a few people that you influence so much that it changed their life in a way that they're doing great things with their life. And again, that changes the world. That's you don't change the world by the masses, right? You change one person at a time, or you don't change them, but you help them change for the better. You help them become better versions of themselves. And I think a big part of being a legend, and then of course becoming a legend, being that legend in your own life, is while you don't want to compromise on your vision, right? You don't want to compromise on that, but you also have to be adaptable to changes that are happening. These are those things that we talked about that are out of your control. The world, it's spinning, right? It is constantly changing in every way, shape, and form. Your values don't change. Your vision doesn't change, right? That you have for your life, but the elements around you are changing. So you have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to pivot appropriately, right? When these changes, when these things are coming into your life. And like we said earlier, Ken and everyone, you choose the way you react to certain things. Even the most unspeakable things could happen to you, right? Hopefully they don't. Hopefully great things happen to you. But we all have those unfortunate events in life. You still have complete 100% control over the way you react to those things. And that's going to determine your next step. That's going to determine how you take that next step. If you take that next step, it's going to determine what you become, right? So being adaptable to changes in your life and it happen around you, I think that's a crucial part as well.
Become the Pied Piper of your destiny, my friend. You know
That's
about the
true.
story of the Pied Piper, right?
I do, from Dave Mustaine's song,
Yeah.
from Megadeth song, right? Symphony of
I was just
Destruction.
about to say, just
I
listen
remember
to Dave
James.
Mustaine.
I remember the video of James Hetfield. I love rivalries because, like I was talking about Arnold real quick. He was one of my heroes, still is. And Sylvester Stallone. I should have talked about him a lot more, maybe in a different show. But I'm just as much of a fan of Stallone as I am Schwarzenegger. Well, they were rivalries back then because they
Sure.
were kind of competing against one another. And you had the same thing with James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine. And I remember when they played Symphony of Destruction, James listened to it. It's on some video. It's probably on YouTube somewhere. He's like, "Oh, Pied Piper." He's like, "Yeah, I just can't get into that, man." Just kind of make fun of it. That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The drama amongst famous people gets kind of crazy, man.
Yeah, it
Uh,
does, dude.
it, it's just kind of wild. Do you think Dave still has any angst against Jeff? I mean,
James,
I'm James. Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. Over the years, like I remember my wife, when it came out, she bought me some kind of Monster, Metallica's documentary, and that was very interesting, and Dave was in that. And yeah, I think it's hard to say, but just watching interviews with Dave, uh, I'm so glad things worked out the way they did because I love Megadeth. I love Megadeth and Metallica equally. And you know what, Ken? I love a lot of bands who were influenced by both Megadeth and Metallica, or some were just inspired by Megadeth. Not everybody likes Metallica. Not everybody likes Megadeth. Some were just inspired by Metallica. So the things that, this goes along with everything we've talked about today. Metallica, both Metallica and Megadeth, whether you like them or not, it's irrelevant. Is the fact that they are musical legends in the metal community, and they
Yeah.
have inspired so many people, so
Mhm.
many other bands. So that on its own just speaks volumes, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. These bands went out there and created their own way. They didn't find a way, they created their way. It's very important to understand, guys. You have to create your path. We say all the time on Metal Mastermind, our theme is create your own sound. Don't mimic somebody else's, right? Create your own. It's there within you. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because I try to put myself in the mind of Dave Mustaine just for a few seconds, and like, okay, I was kicked out of this band where I wrote a lot of the songs and solos and such for Kill 'Em All, their first album. And this band goes on to become like really the most successful band in the history of heavy metal. So And I
Hmm.
don't think the money upset him as much as what, hey, I was supposed to be part of this. This is my thing, just as much as anyone else's. So does he hold on to some of that? I would say like these days and I can't speak for Dave. It's not like I personally know him, but I would say maybe not at all, or at least not near as much as he has over the years. Because again, he's created a very successful band and brand, Megadeth.
Right.
I mean, that is his
His pride and
corporation.
joy.
It
Yeah.
really is, man. It's his creation. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer. I don't think Dave wastes much of his time cursing at Metallica anymore.
Can we go back to something? But this is a very good example, guys, of again adapting to change. So let's go back to this scenario. Imagine yourself. Close your eyes for a second. Don't do it if you're driving, but just imagine yourself in this heavy metal band, right? And you help write some of the songs. You're a part of it, and you get booted out of that band, and that band starts to become really successful and well known. You got two choices, right? You can fold and you can just play the victim and get all upset and like, oh, well, that was my shot. Or you can go out and create Megadeth. Dave
Yeah.
Mustaine adapted to an unfortunate event that happened in his life. Now, he was still pissed off about it. Look, you can have whatever emotion you want to about the event, but the action that you take, the mentality that you have that drives that action to move you forward rather than playing the victim, well, that's going to determine your outcome for your life. These events, life's circumstances, they don't have any emotion. They don't care that we're upset or hurt or feel cheated, right? They don't, the circumstance itself doesn't care about that. It's emotionless. It's like a robot, right? Of course,
Yeah.
I think we're building robots with emotions these days. Who knows? I swear that's gonna take that's the next course of I don't want to say humanity, but the next who knows? That's a story in itself. Too many movies and books have been made about it. But you know what I mean? Like Dave Mustaine had the choice to play the victim and just waller in his pity and oh, woe is me, or I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna kick ass. I'm gonna create something on my own. So he took that energy, he took that anger, and he turned it into something really, really beautiful. I mean, Megadeth is just an amazing entity,
And what better way than to leave it at that? I mean, Dave is, as a legend to metalheads, a great example of adapting to change and still fulfilling his destiny. Bravo to him.
Yeah. So as we wrap things up here, we just started last week, and Ken, we didn't even talk about this prior to the podcast. But we started our song of the week last week, man. So do you have a song of the week that you'd like to share? A metal song of the week?
Yeah, I usually every now and then I hit up this band called Inferi on
Cool.
my Apple Music playlist, and it's a song called Heirs of the Descent. I find their sound to be very, very, very heavy, with a lot of that technical death metal influence in their solos. I just love things that have a bit of a classical sound to them, like with the melodic structure. And if you guys haven't checked out my course on metal music theory, it's something that I love and passionate about. So but yeah, I love technical music, and Inferi is a great example of doing that. Heirs of the Descent is the song. The album is called Vile Genesis. Very good stuff.
Okay, cool, man. That's awesome. Awesome, dude. Yeah, check that out, guys. My song of the week here is by a band called Delain. I'm a huge Delain fan. I saw them open for Nightwish when I first saw Nightwish perform. This is probably back in 2000. I want to say 15, 16, something like that. It was in Orlando, Florida. I go into this. They were out in what was it? The House of Blues in Orlando. Walk in, I hear this opening band, and they just sounded phenomenal. I'm like, who is this? And I found out it was
Incredible.
Delain. I'm like, wow. So I started listening to them. So my song of the week is by them. It's a song called, and I forget the name of it. The mind is a horrible thing. It's off of their, I hate the name of this album. I'm sorry, but it's off of their Apocalypse and Chill album. And the song is called Chemical Redemption. This is one of the songs when it comes on, it just it's just captivating. There's something with the progressions of the song. The vocals are just phenomenal in this song here. It's just so cool. Now, real quick, a little history. So this is actually with their prior lineup.
Oh wow.
Delain has a new album out, 2023. This year, they released an album called Dark Waters, with a new singer, Diana Leah, on vocals, and they've got a new lineup all together. I don't know all the details of what happened with the old lineup. Timo, he was the old guitarist in Delain for a while. I actually met him at a show, just briefly. It was a really bad picture that we got together because it was really dark and couldn't see anything. But I like the old lineup. I love the old lineup, but I like the new one too. And actually, I'm kind of buddies with Sanders, the drummer for Delain. He played drums for Delain, I think, back before 2014, and now he's back with Delain again. Delain started out, from my understanding, as just a project. I don't know that it was ever intended to be a live, playing live and that sort of thing. Maybe that was the intent, but it was just a project that had started out. And it kind of just grew, kind of just like blew up in a good way. So anyway, Chemical Redemption, though, I love that song off the Apocalypse and Chill album. I'm just not a fan of the title of that album, but whatever. It's not my album. So, but it's a great album. That's the thing. Like, you look at the cover, I look at the cover of it and look at the name of it. I'm like, it's probably not something I'm going to like. What'd you guys do, Delain? But it's might be one of my favorite albums. I do like, and I don't mean to go on about this, but I'm doing it anyway. I do like the Dark Waters album as well, their latest album. I love their new vocalists and new lineup as well. So anyway, that's the song, that's the band. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you being a part of Metal Mastermind. Remember to head over to metalmastermind.com. Check out our courses. Ken mentioned earlier his music theory course. Ken, you created this course. He created this. We're actually starting to put some helpful tips on music theory. I just look pretty and play guitar for these videos because I don't know much about theory, but I've dug into Ken's course a little bit, learning some, through Ken. But Ken is the master at music theory. He has a great way of explaining this, and how that translates over into metal music. So I love the way he breaks that down. So check that out. It's a great course called Metal Music Theory on metalmastermind.com. We've got other courses on there as well. Guitar courses. We've got a vocal course. We've got our songwriting course and several others. More coming down the pipeline as well. So check those out at metalmastermind.com. Guys, thank you. Until next time, as always, create your own sound.